research industry. I'm from the internet meets healthcare industry. And for about 20 years since the web came along, I've been basically trying to solve one problem. And that one problem is, how do you collect non-incented data from every city and every country in the world? Because I feel that that has tremendous power for the collection of data and predictive analytics and all sorts of baseline measurement. And I'll be talking about my invention, which now becomes our company's technology for our way in which we collect data from every country in the world. And it's called random domain intercept technology. Very simply put, at 1,000 feet high level, basically we leverage what's called the DNS, or the domain name system of the internet. When you input what's called a misdirected URL on any browser, any web-enabled device, we have access to hundreds of thousands, literally unlimited domains that are not trademark domains, upon which somebody will be served up 2 to 12 questions, very simple questions that they may or may not want to ask. And we've been very fortunate to work with very large NGOs around the world. And I'll be speaking about some examples with some very brief PowerPoint slides. Thank you. So, as many of you know, this is the guy who invented the World Wide Web, not the internet. Some other folks lay claim to that invention. But what a lot of people don't know about Tim Berners-Lee, and this is in his earlier age, is that he didn't so much invent technology, but he invented a language. He invented a nomenclature by which we communicate, by which corporations communicate through email, first with government, then with organizations, and then email, that end in .com, that end in .nl. It's a common nomenclature, essentially by which companies and organizations can talk to one another. And when that breaks down, when the DNS system breaks down, if it's hacked, like what happened in China 2 weeks ago, hundreds of millions of people can be without access to their corporate email. And that has tremendous commercial implications. So Tim Berners-Lee, and I have the fortunate opportunity to present his foundation next week in London, essentially invented this nomenclature, the lingua franca, or telephone book of the internet. Because as you know, computers talk to each other through numbers, but we as humans talk to each other through names. And that's how we remember names through the URL system. So this is how our questions are rendered when you may stumble upon a misdirected URL when you type in on the navigation bar across any device on the web. And they're very simple questions. They're rendered basically to the client's needs. We are not experts in question design. We defer to the client. We've asked questions in every single country and territory in the world. I think that's 246. We specialize in emerging markets. We recently presented at the Open Governments Summit in London, where we presented to leaders of 61 countries looking at perceptions of open government. And we also we worked with a large global risk organization where we collected about 50,000 respondents in 31 countries, primarily in Africa and emerging markets. And these are the types of questions that we ask that are rendered. And you have the option, of course, of answering the question, and we default to the strictest privacy regulations in the world. Our first client was the International Association of Prosecutors. So what's special about random domain intercept technology? Probably 5 major points. We're global. That's a major competitive advantage. We like to work, and we do work with large, major market research companies. We have limitations, obviously. Like Google consumer surveys, they're short. We call them nano surveys. They call them micro surveys. We have major methodological differences from them, of course, I can go into. We're random, so we're representative of the internet population. Given the penetration and the usage of that internet population in any given geography or country in the world, we are non-incented. There are no incentives to answering our surveys. That's fundamental to our core belief in pure data. We're proven. So we've been third-party audited by some of the most sophisticated companies in the world in terms of our representativeness, geographic representativeness, our representative of the internet population, and we're also patented. And what's interesting, as my background, being in healthcare and research, and this was originally applied for government-commissioned pandemic surveillance, was that in Toronto, where I'm from, we were kind of ground zero in SARS, which was an epidemic during the fall of 2009. And in my research unit, we were looking at various social listening mechanisms for trying to determine pandemic spread. But we then said, well, look, our company hadn't been commercialized yet, but hey, why don't we collect 1 million respondents around the world and ask them basic questions like whether you know whether hand washing is protective against the flu, or whether you know whether coughing into your sleeve is protective against the flu. And we use simple visuals and simple language in the country of origin. And what you see there is that red highlighted area, the Philippines. And what's kind of interesting, and what kind of blew my mind away until I talked to real public health experts at Stanford and elsewhere, is that we found some really counterintuitive findings. We published the Canadian data in a scientific journal, but the counterintuitive findings were essentially, and we found the same thing with measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine as well, is that in very educated countries like the United States, Canada, and other countries, there is gross misinformation about the safety and accuracy of the vaccine. Yet in countries where there are life and death issues surrounding the use of the vaccine and basic hand hygiene principles, there's actually higher take-up and use. And that was very exciting. So I'm not the only one who believes that global baseline measurement is the seed of innovation. So this guy you recognize, January 25th, Wall Street Journal, 2013, he had a long essay called How I Will Solve the World's Toughest Problems. And there's probably about 40,000 hits on Google. And essentially what he said is, my wife and I have been at this foundation for 7 years. And finally, we've discovered that measurement, basic measurement, is the seed of innovation, especially in these tough countries like Africa, Indonesia. You know, and he used a bunch of examples like return on investment of education, higher education in particular. He looked at malaria. He looked at a number of things that are priorities for the Gates Foundation. And he said, look, if we can measure these things and trend them and track them over time, we can get some extraordinary data. RIWI stands for Random or Real-Time Interactive Worldwide Intelligence. So we collect data, big data, we don't like to use that term, on a daily basis. And so we like to use that data to inform or help our clients inform their decision making. And that's it. Thank you.